Maaseret Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph. Hayover Bashuk ve'omar tlu lechem te'enim. What are we talking about here? So we learned in the previous parak that when a person plans to bring the fruit from the field, fruit home from the field, even if it's completely processed, it can still be eaten achilas arai until he brings it to the house. Based on this, the Mishnah teaches halacha about an Amaretz who's passing through the street and is giving out figs as a gift. An Amaretz, again, is someone who's not learned in Torah. Such people were often not careful about mitzvahs, including maises. The Chachamim, therefore, were geyser that someone who receives produce, fruit from an Amaretz, must separate maises from it before he eats it. The fruit of Amaretz is known as demai. There's no need to separate truma from demai, since all Amaretz were careful to separate truma. It's only necessary to separate maiser rishon and maiser sheni, or maiser ani from it. Although most Amei Ha'aretz separated even these maisers from it, some of them didn't. The Chacham therefore decreed that these maisers should be separated from any produce bought or received from an Amei Ha'aretz. As we were ma'arech in Masechta Demai, different halachas of how to do, what to do, the who, what, where, when, why of Demai, the food of Amei Ha'aretz. This Gzeira applies only to produce that was brought into the house, which became fully mechuyev maises. However, before these pears were brought into the house, it's not the custom for anyone to separate maises from his produce. So the produce of Amaretz is no different from that of anyone else. It may be eaten achilas arai, but not achilas keva. The Mishnah now is going to teach us when we may assume that Amaretz's produce has not yet come into the house and when it's mutter. Meaning, because based on where the Amaretz is holding with his fruits, we'll make a nafkamina into how, if we'd be mechuyev to take with ma'aser from this demai or not. So Hayover Bashuk of Amaretz was passing through the market with a basket of figs, and he was offering them to people. So take some of the figs for as a gift. They may eat these figs as a snack and are parted from separating maasers first. We assume that the Amaretz was coming from the field with his figs and not yet brought it home. This is because the Mishnah is talking about a place where most people do not sell the produce but take it home to use themselves. Therefore, we can assume that he's just passing through the market with this basket of figs on his way home from the field. We do not suspect that he previously brought this produce home and then went out with it again, because people who do not sell the produce do not usually bring it out to the market once they have taken it home. So for this reason, they may be eaten achilas arai without taking off any maisers. Therefore, if the people accepted this gift from the Amaretz and brought these figs to their own homes instead of eating on them in the shuk, obviously, we're not talking about eating in the shuk, right? You're not allowed to eat in the shuk. The person who eats in the shuk is possibly edus and all kinds of other things. So Misakin and Vadai, they must separate maises from them as definite tevel, not just as demai. Misakin, the Lashon of Tikkun, is referring to when produce becomes forbidden to eat until maises are separated. Separating the maises, our matirit, is like fixing it, so now you can eat it. Okay. A case. The Mishnah now goes through a case where Amaretz produce probably did come into the house and therefore is not mutter to eat. Therefore will be also to eat achilas arai. Amaretz offers them figs and says, take these figs and bring them into your homes. They may not eat them as a snack, achilas arai, without separating maises. By telling them to eat the figs at home, he's in effect saying that he already separated maises from them. This implies that he already brought them home. Since we do not trust them by separating maises, the figs cannot be eaten at all until we separate maises from them, the same as any other produce received from an Amaretz. The Amaretz knows that once he brings his produce home, it cannot be eaten without maises being separated. This is very interesting. He knows about it, but he's not doing the mitzvah or being masakin what he needs to be masakin. Therefore, by saying that these figs should be eaten at home, he implies that he already separated maises from them. Meaning, because there were Amaretz that were ma'aser, or just that, Roiv Amaretz were ma'aser, just to be mechazik the Indian, if you could say. Being mechazik the chiyuv of maisers, so that's where they goes around the Mai, as we discussed back in the Masechta Mai. He also implies that he previously brought these figs into his house because people do not usually separate maisers from produce they do not bring home. Since he admits that he brought the figs at home, he cannot be eaten anymore achilas arai. And since he's an Amaretz, he's not nemon about separating maisers. Therefore, the people who receive the figs cannot eat them even achilas arai. Therefore, if they brought these figs to their homes, if they separate maises to them only as demai and not as tevel, they do not have to separate truma for them, and the maises they do separate have certain kulas because it's demai and it's not vadai. Mishnah Beis. We learned in the previous parak that produce whose processing has been completed in the field becomes forbidden to eat, even achilas arai. However, this is true only for fruit that's meant for the market, but fruit that's being brought home may be eaten as a snack until it reaches the house. Nevertheless, Rabbanan were geizer that 6 things cause the meiser to become kavua even before the produce, the fruit, enters the home. This means that the produce may no longer be eaten even as a snack without separating meisers. The rest of the parak discusses the effects of 3 of these things. 3 of these things that are kaveh l'maiser: separating truma, selling the produce and bringing it into the chotzer. The Mishnah deals with bringing the produce into the chotzer, and it teaches the important qualification of this rule. Meaning he brings it into the chotzer and he doesn't bring it into the house. If people were sitting in the gateway of a courtyard or in a store, and the owner of the courtyard of the store said to them, take some figs for yourself I have outside the courtyard of the store. The Mishnah speaks of a case where the owner brought a basket of figs in from the field but left it outside his courtyard of the store. Had the owner brought them into his courtyard of the store, they would certainly have become prohibited to eat. They may take figs, bring them into the courtyard, store them to eat them as a snack, and they're parted from separating ma'asos before eating them. However, the owner of the gateway of the chotzer and the owner of the store are mechuyev to separate ma'asos from the figs and bring in before any of them may be eaten. Although bringing produce into a courtyard of the store is kaveh l'maiser, and aser's eating achilas arai, it does so only when someone brings it into his own courtyard or store, not into someone else's. Therefore, the figs the other people bring in may be eaten achilas arai because those people are not bringing them into their own courtyard or store, but the ones the owner brings in cannot be eaten until he separates maitzos. When these other people took figs for themselves, they acquired them and became the owners of the figs. When they then brought them into the courtyard or store, they were bringing their figs into someone else's courtyard or store. This is not a kaveh l'maiser. However, the figs the owner brought in were his figs, which he brought into his own courtyard. Therefore, they may not be eaten by anyone until maitzos have been separated. Rabbi Yehuda poiter ad sheyachzer es panav oid sheyeshan es mokim yeshivasei. According to the Tanna Kama, whatever the owner brings into his chotzer or store becomes kaveh l'maiser as soon as it enters the courtyard or store. The Mishnah says Rabbi Yehuda says that even if the owner of the chotzer or the store is pater from separating the maisos in the chotzer or in the customer area of the store, unless he turns his face to the side while he eats, so that people do not see him eating. Why? Zok the Rab, does not want to eat in front of people, and he's embarrassed to eat in front of them, so he turns away. But in a place where he's not sitting and selling, he's not embarrassed. So if he's embarrassed, that means he doesn't want to eat there. So, meaning that Vaistis didn't being kaveh l'maiser is a place where he's comfortable eating. Normally, you don't eat fruit in the chutz, you eat the fruit in the house. So the house is a makom where it's kaveh. A store, maybe you eat in the store, so maybe bringing it into the store should automatically be kaveh. But Dr. Yehuda like this, that unless he turns his face to the side while he eats, so that people don't see him eating, or unless he changes his seat before he eats, he's not facing the customers while he eats. According to Rabbi Yehuda, only the parts of the chotzer of the store in which the owner is not embarrassed to eat are kaveh l'maiser. Since a person is uncomfortable eating at the entrance to his chotzer, because people passing by can see him, or his store is facing his customers, even if the owner himself brings the figs into these areas, they have not yet become set for maiser, and they may still be snacked on. Later on in Parag Gimel, there's a sheet of Reb Nechemia. However, a person is embarrassed to eat in the store only when he sits to deal with his customers. When he's away from that place, he's not embarrassed to eat even though they can see him eating. So it depends exactly what it is. He's also not embarrassed to even eat at his regular place when he doesn't face the customers. So if he sits in his regular spot but he turns his way to eat, or he moves to another spot in the store, he can't eat achilas arai until he takes off ma'aser. Very interesting. Halacha, very darkest the gedukim over here, really. According to Rabbi Yehuda, at least, what the dinim are for being kaveh l'maiser. Mishnah Gimel, Hamala Peres Menagol Yehuda early l'Yerushalayim. The previous Mishnah taught that if a person brings his produce into someone else's courtyard, it doesn't become kaveh l'maiser. and he may still eat it as a snack, may eat it achilas arai without separating ma'aser. The same is true if he brings it into someone else's home. This halacha is especially important to a traveling merchant who sometimes stays in a place for a short time before moving on. The Mishnah is going to discuss whether the place he stays in for the time being is considered his house in regard to hilchas ma'aser. So somebody who takes his produce from his field, min Galil, up to Yehuda to sell. He wants to sell his produce in Yehuda where the prices are higher. The produce is still mutter for achilas arai when he starts out. Although we learned previously that when a person intends to sell his peiros in the market, it becomes asur to eat achilas arai as soon as it's completed in the field. This halacha applies only to produce that he intends to take to a shuk, to a local market. Since he might sell it on the way to the market, the chacham or geyser on it that as soon as production is complete, it's ready to go to the market. That it's asur. However, meaning it's kaveh l'maiser. However, when a person plans to take his produce and sell it in another province where the prices are higher, he does not intend to sell it until he gets there. It's therefore mutter ba'achilas arai until he reaches his destination. Or he goes up to Yerushalayim to sell his produce. He may eat that produce as a snack until he reaches the place where he's going, even if he stays in the house overnight on the way. Since he does not own the house in which he stays in, bringing his produce into it does not asur it and is not kaveh l'maiser. However, as soon as he reaches his destination, the produce becomes asur, since he is not prepared to sell it to the first buyer he finds. And so too, and so too in his return, if before reaching Yehuda, he decided to bring his produce back to the Golil, he may continue to eat it as a snack, achilas arai, until he gets back to his home in the Golil. We do not assume in this case that he's planning to sell it on the way back. Rather, we assume he's planning to take it back to his home in the Golil. He is therefore permitted to continue eating achilas arai until he gets there. Rameir says he may eat it as a snack until he reaches the place where he plans to spend Shabbos. Even if it's not his final destination. Once he reaches that place, it's also for him to eat achilas arai even before Shabbos begins, because the place where a person stays for Shabbos is considered like his home. This is a very interesting halacha. It makes a big nafkamina for a few halachas besides for hilchas ma'aser. This Erev, and a person needs to be kind of shvisa. During the week, a person will stay overnight even in a place where he's somewhat uncomfortable. He's more careful, however, in choosing a place to stay for Shabbos. Therefore, once he comes to a place where he plans to stay for Shabbos, is considered his home, and bringing his produce into it is kaveh l'maiser, and atzes any achilas arai. The Tanakama agrees that it's also to snack on it once it's Shabbos, because Shabbos in and of itself is something that's kaveh l'maiser. The machlekes between Tanakama and Rameir is whether the produce becomes kaveh even before Shabbos begins. Because let's say a person comes to the Achsanya where he's staying, he comes there, 12 o'clock of Shabbos. So according to the Tanakama, Shabbos is kaveh. According to Rameir, once he gets to 12 o'clock, that's kaveh, because it's the makam shvisa. It's not the etzem Shabbos that's going to be kaveh, because everyone's masking that Shabbos is kaveh. But once he gets to the makam shvisa, even if it's earlier in the day, even if it's in the morning of Erev Shabbos, the makam shvisa of Shabbos is going to be kaveh l'maisa. Peddlers who go around to old towns in a particular area selling makeup and perfume, they may eat achilas arai from the fruits that they brought along with them until they reach the place where they will sleep for the night. A peddler is different from the traveler mentioned in the beginning of the Mishnah. A peddler usually stays in one house for several days while he travels around all the towns in the area selling his wares. Therefore, the house he stays in during the time is considered his temporary home. He's much more kavua there. Masha'in came the person who's being ma'ila Paris. He's a regular traveler. It's not a reichel. It's a different business. Even though they go into many different houses during the course of the day to sell their wares, the produce doesn't become asur because those houses are not theirs. However, once they reach the house in which they plan to stay overnight, the Paris become asur ba'achilas arai because this place is treated as their own home. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer habayis harishin hu beisai. The first house the peddler enters in the town where he plans to spend the night is considered his house, even if he doesn't end up staying in the house. Therefore, if he brings the produce into it, he cannot eat it without separating ma'aser. When a peddler comes to town, he wants to put down his things in the first place he can. He's schlepping his packages, he got to dump it off. If the owner of the first house comes to agree to let him stay there, he would gladly stay there. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda holds that even if he ends up staying somewhere else on the other side of town, the first house he enters is considered his home, since he would have stayed there had he been given the chance. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that the first house that he gets to is already kaveh l'maiser. Mishnah Dalet. Another halacha that's kaveh l'maiser is separating truma. Once truma is separated from produce, we can't snack on it until there's no achilas aray, until all the maasros are separated from it properly. So perisha tarman actually nigma malachtam, produce from which a person separated truma before the processing was complete. That's before the gemar malacha, which we learned in parakal. For example, he separated truma from cucumbers before the hair-like coverings fall off or grain before he smoothed down the pile. So perisha tarman actually nigma malachtam. Rabbi Lezer Oser Melechem Me'am Aray. Rabbi Lezer Aser is eating it achilas aray without separating maasros from it. According to Rabbi Lezer, being mafresh truma is kevel l'maiser, even if the produce did not have gemar malach v'chomatir nechomar matir, eating it achilas aray. The shittas hachacham over here is that being mafresh truma doesn't change the status of something that has not yet been fully processed. If it's not gemar malacha and he took off truma, it's still going to be mutter to eat achilas aray. Chutz min kal kolas te'enim, except in the case of a basket of fresh figs, where if he separated truma from the figs before he finished processing them, before he covered the figs he collected in a basket with leaves, like the Mishnah said earlier in Parak Aleph, they become forbidden to snack on. This is because separating truma from figs in a basket is the gemar malacha. Kol kolas te'enu shetarma. In the case of a basket of figs from which someone separated truma before its processing was completed, is a machlekes. Rav Shimon matir v'chachamim meiser. Rav Shimon matir is eating the figs as a snack, and the chachamim asret, as the Mishnah taught before, Rav Shimon does not accept the rule that truma is kavea l'meiser, even in the case of a basket of figs. Rav Shimon argues that if figs are permitted for snacking before any of the maasros are separated, it makes no sense to say that they should be treated more strictly after truma is separated. Okay. Mishnah hey ha'or malachaver. Someone says to his friend, "Heilich is as eveteinli by chamesh teinim." If a person sells the produce, that's also kaveh l'maiser. So the Mishnah teaches us that when pears that are sold become kavua l'maiser, when it's also to eat achilas aray. So ha'or malachaver. Someone says to his friend, "Heilich is as eveteinli by chamesh teinim." Here's the iser. Give me 5 figs in exchange for it. And the figs are still attached to the tree. La yoichel ad she'yaser. The buyer may not eat those figs, even achilas aray, until he's mafresh meiser from them, because selling the produce sets its chiyuv l'maiser divrei Reb Meir. Although these figs were not yet processed, Reb Meir holds that selling produce is enough to be kaveh l'maiser, even if it didn't have a gemar malach yet. Rabbi Yehuda Omer oichel achas pater. If he eats one by one, as the seller gives it to him, he's pater from separating maasros. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that selling produce cannot be kaveh l'maiser until the gemar malacha. Now these figs do not yet have the gemar malacha. The buyer can therefore eat them one by one, which is not kaveya, which is achilas aray, until he's going to take off meiser. B'mtziraf chayiv. But if the seller combined 2 figs and gave them to the buyer together, he's mechuyev to separate meiser before he eats them. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we treat 2 figs together as a small pile. Therefore, the 2 fruits gathered together are considered processed enough for selling to finish the processing and set the chiyuv meiser. This is a chumer midrabanan. The Chachamim did not make this gzera for single figs because they learned from a pasuk that at least 2 fruits must be collected together to be considered a pile. In Yerushalmi state that Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda are chaylik only in a case where the seller picks the figs from the tree and hands them over to the buyer. However, if the buyer picks the figs, even Reb Meir will be moida that he may pick and eat them one by one without having to separate them. Rabbi Yehuda, Zok Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'isa beginas Radam Shesi B'Shalayim. There's a story involving a rose garden that was in Yerushalayim, that the figs that grew in that garden were sold for 3 or 4 figs for an iser, which is a certain amount of money, and they were picked by the owner of the garden and given to the buyer one by one. The owner did not let other people go into the garden to pick because he was afraid that they would damage the rose bushes. And Truma and Meiser were never separated from the figs of the garden. This shows that even when figs are sold, they may be eaten one by one without taking off Meiser. Since this was a case where the seller picked the figs, we see that they may be eaten one by one by the buyer without Meiser being separated, even in such a case. Ukashita Rabbi Yehuda. Mishnah Vav. However, someone says to his friend, here's the Isser in exchange for 10 figs that I will choose for myself from the tree. Buyer va'oichel may choose figs one by one and eat them as he picks them without separating Meiser. Since he's taking and eating them before the processing is complete, the Chi of Meiser is not Keveh Meiser yet. If he says in exchange for a cluster of grapes that I will choose for myself, my gargav oichel, he may pick one grape at a time from the cluster while it's still attached to the vine and eat it without separating Meisers. If he says in exchange for a pomegranate, I will choose for myself part of let me pick one seed at a time from the pomegranate while it's still attached to the tree and eat the seed. Without separating mices, he can break open the pomegranate while it's still attached to the tree and take one seed at a time from it and eat it. Each seed is treated as a separate fruit, therefore he cannot break off two at once and eat them without taking off micer. It's big chiddush because it's it's one thing if you have like a sheretz that's less than a kazayas, and it has a certain level of shleimus to it, that if a person eats it, even if it's not a kazayas, but it's a shalom, it has a certain shleimus. So here, you're breaking apart that some fruit inside these little seeds. Each seed has a din of its own fruit. If he says in exchange for a melon that I will choose for myself, he may cut off one thin slice at a time while the melon is still attached to the ground, and eat it without separating mices. Although melon is just one fruit, it's too big to be eaten as once. Since it's usually cut into pieces before it's eaten, each piece is treated as a separate unit. Therefore, he may not cut off more than one piece at a time and eat without separating mices. In the first case of the Mishnah, the buyer didn't specify in advance which fruits he wanted. He just asked that he be allowed to check them and pick the ones he wanted. The Mishnah now discusses a case where he specified which particular fruits he wanted before he gave the money. If the buyer said, here's the Isra Nashim for these 20 figs growing on the tree, or these 2 clusters of grapes, or these 2 pomegranates, or these 2 melons, he may eat them in a normal way. He may pick even 2 or more of them at one time and eat them achilas arai, and he's parted from being mafresh maisas meneshel kana b'chol lakarka, because he brought the fruit when it was still attached to the ground. Produce that's attached to the ground, that's mechol lakarka, cannot become kavel lamaiser even while they're selling them. Even after he picks it and processes it, it still doesn't become kavel lamaiser, since he bought it while it was still attached. He's like the owner of the tree or the field, who may pick the produce and eat achilas arai, even after it's processed, even after the Gemar Malocha, until he brings it to his house. Mishnah Zayin. The Mishnah discusses someone who buys produce by working for it, rather than by paying money. The Torah says that someone who's hired to work with produce that's not yet completely processed has the right to eat from it as he works. Okay. This is not part of his payment. It's a special right given by the Torah to workers. So whatever he takes under this rule is not considered bought, and he may eat it without taking off ma'aser. Because the poor is allowed to snack and nash on the stuff that he's working for. However, in circumstances where a worker is not entitled to take and eat under this halacha, but he arranged with the owner at the time he was hired to be given the right to eat, the produce he takes is considered bought because it's payments for his work. Therefore, he cannot eat it as a snack without taking off ma'aser. The Mishnah teaches on produce that's eaten while it's being worked on is considered bought, and when it's not. Someone hires a worker to help him spread out figs to dry. The worker said to him, I'll work on a condition that I can eat the figs while I work. Pater may eat the figs as a snack, and his pater was separating ma'aser, even though he said he wanted to be able to eat the figs as part of his wages. He was entitled to them as a worker anyway. Therefore, the figs he takes are not considered payments for his work, and he may eat them as a snack without separating ma'aser. However, if he says, I'll work on the condition that I and the members of my household can eat the figs, or I'll work on condition that my son can eat figs as part of my wage, he, the worker, may eat and is exempt from separating ma'aser from what he eats, because he eats by right and not by agreement. And the other members of the household or his son may eat, but is mechuyev to separate ma'aser first, since the son receives figs only as payments for his father's work. Those figs are considered bought, and they must have ma'aser separated before they can be eaten. If he says, I'll work on the condition that I can eat figs while we spread them out to dry, even after you have spread them out to dry, he may eat figs at the time he spreads them out, and is part from separating ma'aser. However, after they've been spread out, he may eat them, but is mechuyev to separate ma'aser before eating them, because he's not eating at the time based on the right that the Torah gives him. The right applies, this reshus that the Torah gives him, that he's allowed to eat while he's working, only applies while he's working with the produce. Once he finishes spreading them out, he's no longer working on the figs. So he may eat afterwards only because the owner gave him a right to do so as part of his schar. He must therefore separate ma'aser before he eats. This is the rule. Someone who eats based on the right granted him by the Torah as a worker who's pater from taking off ma'aser, so then he's going to be pater. However, someone who does not eat based on the right granted to him by the Torah, but only by agreement with the owner, is mechuyev to separate ma'aser before eating. Meaning that the bailam, just because you're working for the bailam does not pater you from being taken off ma'asers. Masha enken, if the Torah allows you to eat, so then you are pater from ma'asers. Mishnah Ches. If a person was working with lavasim, a type of low-quality figs that's lamed beis samach, he may not eat b'nei sheva figs, a type of high-quality fig. B'nei sheva, if he was working with b'nei sheva figs, he may not eat lavasim figs. A worker is permitted to eat only from the type of fruit which he was working. However, while he's working with the lower quality figs, he may, if he wants, hold himself back from eating until he reaches a place where the higher quality figs grow, and he can then eat his fill while he works on them. Okay, that's just a little bit halacha of poyalim. Hamakhlefim chaverei, someone who trades produce with his friend in any of the following ways. Zel echel v'zel echel. This person gives someone produce that's ready to eat, and that person gives him back other produce that's ready to eat. Zel luktzos v'zel luktzos. This person gives someone produce that was laid out to dry and is not yet ready to eat, and that person gives him back other produce that was laid out to dry and is not yet ready to eat. Zel echel v'zel luktzos. This person gives someone produce that's ready to eat, and that person gives him back produce that was laid out to dry and still not ready to eat. Chayv, in all these cases, each person is mechuyev to separate maasros from the pairs before eating it. Trading for produce is like buying it. Since each person traded the produce he's not going to eat, he cannot snack on it without taking off maaser. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, Hamachlef lechol chayiv. If one who trades for produce that's ready to eat is mechuyev to separate maaser before eating it, because it was completely processed when he bought it. It looked as pater. But the one who trades for produce that had been laid out to dry is pater from separating maasers, because the produce he bought was not completely processed when he bought it.